Good day, Dinamante. I am Christine Macy Esperanza of MPA 1/2-8 of Modular Class, and I will be discussing about executive leadership and supervisory development. Chapter 1, Communications, Part 1, The Practical Arts of Communications, Communication Problem. So, learning objectives, understand how the communication process works, recognize the importance of the concept of one-way versus two-way communication, and why two-way communications are necessary. Recognize the many human barriers to communication and how to avoid them. Understand that communication go upward, downward, and in a horizontal manner, and know the types of communication that go in this direction. Next, recognize the variety of communications problems that exist and know how to compensate for them. Next, recognize that a grapevine will exist in the organization and what it is to continually provide proper information if grapevine problems are to be avoided. And last, understand the art of oral communication and the techniques of speaking, listening, and perceiving. So, communication. Communication is the process of sharing information with others to achieve a desirable result. The manager must understand the communication process, the role of feedback, and the importance of verbal versus nonverbal communication. In a positive communication process, the individual speaks or writes the other person or persons receive the message, and then the receiver perceives what is said and some positive action is taken. In a negative communication process, the message is received but is misinterpreted, and a negative or non-response is the result of the original communication. So, barriers to communication. First, too little information is provided to carry out the prescribed task. Information overload, especially in a situation where a supervisor or manager can easily receive 130 to 200 emails a day. Third, too complex information. Fourth, inadequate or technical or people type training for the communicator. Fifth, lack of understanding of someone else's culture. Six, lack of knowledge of the audience. Seven, environmental problems interfering with the communication. 8. Use of ambiguous or multi-meaning word. 9. Feedback can be either verbal or non-verbal. And verbal feedback can be requested. Non-verbal feedback can be determined by observing facial expression, gestures, body motions, and looking at the eyes, seeing if they are glazed, averted, or attentive. 10. Selectivity is a means of screening communications to accept or reject that which is of importance to the receiver. Selectivity can become a serious barrier to communications. 11. Or the last, perception of a message is the process by which an individual gives meaning to the communication. Perceptual defense is the screening out of environmental stimuli in order to concentrate on what is important. So, constant oral and visual stimuli can overwhelm you and affect the appropriate perception of the message. If the message does not fit within their boundaries, the message is rejected. And if the communication is incomplete, the individual may erroneously fill in the blanks and react in an appropriate manner. The difference between ineffective and effective communication in an organization may be based on its structure, the grapevine verbal and nonverbal communication, and the level of upward, downward, and sideward communication. So, organizational communication are carried out through first advertising and promotional campaigns, employees communication, next media relations, fourth training programs, fifth public relations, sixth governmental relations, and last the grapevine. So organization can enhance upward communication by using employee opinion attitude survey. The survey should be unsigned. Second, using suggestions box. Third, using the open door policy of management. Fourth, using informal gripe sessions. Fifth, using task force to evaluate problems and programs. Six, using exit interviews. So the good communicator is of necessity a good listener. This type of person will allow others to formulate ideas without interruption, ask stimulating questions, encourage all to participate, be a sympathetic listener, avoid premature judgments, and then briefly summarize the individual's thoughts and give credit when the ideas are good. First line supervisor must be able to communicate effectively in order to lead people and to achieve the necessary objectives of both individuals and the organization. So the effectiveness of a superior or manager will depend largely on his or her ability to interpret and relay information from a higher level in the organization to the working force, and also the problem of the working force to the higher levels. So the first line, supervisor or manager, must be clearly understood, whether the supervisor or manager uses written or spoken words or body language. So the supervisor or manager is the medium whereby information moves from management to employees and then is used. So gestures are communication. Communication consists of gestures, spoken words, and written words, as well as the emotional or conscious state of the sender, receiver, or listener. So the gestures, which are made up of facial expression, physical actions, and the nonverbal signs, can change the entire meaning of communication. So, for example, when a student answers a question but seems to be off in another world, he or she is really saying, I am only paying partial attention to you, and the rest of my concern is elsewhere. So, colors combination used in communication and the type of material used can also affect how communication is received. So, the emotional state of the communicator is also important, because if the communicator is calm, the message is more likely to be received calmly. Whereas, if the message is an excited one, the listener will recognize and respond to the excitement. So, the emotional state of the receiver must be likewise be considered. Next, one-way versus two-way communication. In a one-way communication, the individual develops an idea, turns it into a message, and sends it to the receiver without any participation on the part of the receiver. Unfortunately, although one-way communication is fast, it does not give the sender any feedback on whether or not the communication is being received and acted on as intended. In two-way communication, the message is conceived, sent, and received, and the response occurs because of the communication. The receiver, so the receiver is able to ask question or reiterate the information. So this allowed the receiver to make better judgment and do better quality work. Next, human barriers to communication. Human barriers exist in communication because there are problems of believability, attitudes, and variation in the reasoning process. So barriers to communication. The supervisor or manager, besides being a good communicator, must also recognize various barriers to communication and be able to remove them when necessary. The supervisor or manager, besides being a good communicator, must also recognize various barriers to communication and be able to remove them when necessary. So, communicating with the employees you supervise. A factor to consider is the individual employee's attitude, which is based on his or her feelings and emotions about certain things. And the individual's attitude may block communication effort if the employee feels that the supervisor or manager is unfair. If this feeling continues, it is possible that all necessary communication will be considered unfair by the employee. Next, if the employee feels that he or she can get away with something, he or she will tend to listen to and carry out only the part of the communication which satisfy his or her need. So if the employee has a good attitude, then everything including communication will seem good. If the employee has a poor attitude, then everything including the communication will seem to be poor. So communicating with higher level managers, it has become clear that it is necessary to transmit messages from employees to upper management level in an accurate and expeditious manner. So modern management listen to the employee because the employee best understand the job. So what is wrong or right about it and the techniques to improve the job. Once again, the supervisor or manager becomes an important link in communication with the higher manager just as he or she was in employee communication. So horizontal communication systems. A horizontal communication is one in which the message goes back and forth from department to department, from line organization to staff, and from staff to line organization. The proper way to handle a horizontal communication is to communicate and ask for a response. It may be necessary for the various line and staff groups as well as the various departments to meet with a higher level manager to discuss the communication and how best to implement them. Next, communication problem can occur when the word being used may have a variety of meanings and therefore the person receiving the message misinterprets the message. Second, the timing of the message is poor. Third, the individual is not conditioned to expect a certain type of message from the supervisor or manager and therefore tunes the supervisor or manager out. Fourth, physical noise or other distraction interfere with the verbal communication. And there is a difference in socioeconomic background and also in education between the sender and receiver. And next, the individual receiving the message is preoccupied with his or her own thoughts and not really listening. 7. There is a physical mannerism or set of mannerism exhibited by the supervisor or manager which annoy the individual receiving the message. 8. The employee does not want to receive the message and therefore deliberately stop listening. 9. When the employee is fatigued and it is the end of the day. Next, grapevines. A grapevine exists in all organizations. Information spread in this manner may be highly inaccurate. The following rules may be followed to permit proper information to be spread and to avoid the spread of misinformation. So first, always listen to the grapevine to get an understanding of what might be going on. However, never use it to disseminate information. Second, in an open manner, inform the employees about things which relate to their jobs. Third, make sure that all communications are accurate. Fourth, make sure that all communications are written in a simple form, which will not lead to misinterpretation. Fifth, announce all changes in policies, rules, regulations, and promotions well in advance for the action to be taken. 6. Do not hide information from employees which they might obtain from other sources. 7. When you have inadequate information concerning certain issues and explore them in greater depth to be able to make reasonable explanations to the individuals involved. 8. In a large firm when necessary, set up a rumor information center so that individuals can call and determine if something is correct or incorrect. Next, types of communication. So first, oral, which is person to person. Second, the written report. Third, the written memo. Fourth, speeches. Fifth, recordings. Six, books. Seven, handouts and posters. Eight, televisions. Nine, radio. 10, movies. 11, theater. 12, phone calls. 13, research. 14, electronic media. So oral communication may be in the form of casual conversation, a spontaneous or impromptu speech, a formal speech, or an extemporaneous speech. A casual conversation is generally governed by the atmosphere, and an informal conversation can vary from discussion of last night's basketball game to a new approach to resolving a specific problem within the organization. So, A formal oral report must be prepared in advance. The individual preparing the report should know the audience, determine the objectives of the presentation, determine the scope of the presentation, including the amount of research needed, and use terminology which is readily understood and able to use a special technique such as an interesting factor or shock statement in order to gain the attention of the group and have a definite flow to the presentation. The flow may be from least important to the most important, or it may flow from specific to general to specific. So it is suggested that the speaker have the presentation in outline form, triple or quadruple space in order to quickly look at the item to keep his or her presentation going smooth manner. So the visual aid must be of the value of the presentation. So before making an oral presentation, the individual should develop an outline which include the introduction, the background of the problem, supporting data in a simplified manner, the possible solution, alternative solution, conclusion, recommendation, questions. Next, speaking. Speaking is an art. It takes practice to speak effectively, just it takes practice to play a musical instrument. A speaker's jerky body movements, fidgety gestures, foot shuffling, or any other nervous habit will detract from what is being said. A good speaker tries to control this mannerism. However, the speaker should not stand there motionless when gestures may be necessary to emphasize a specific point. And speakers should not speak too rapidly or too slowly. So, the art of speaking. Most of us speak and some of us listen, and a few of us perceive. When we speak, we must also listen to watch the reactions to our messages. An effective speaker follows the 15 basic rules of communication. First, clarify your ideas before you communicate them. Second, examine the true purpose of each communication. Are you attempting to obtain a specific goal, inform, initiate an action, or change an attitude? Third, consider the total physical and human setting whenever you communicate, and this include the physical environment, social climate, customs, and past practices and timing. Fourth, consult with others when appropriate in planning the communication and obtain support from your co-planners. Fifth, be aware that in addition to the basic content of your message, you may also be communicating overtones and hidden messages. Six, take the opportunity as it arises to convey messages which are helpful or which are of value to the receiver. 7. Follow up your communication by requesting some form of feedback. 8. Communicate is for tomorrow as well as today. Try to make your message one which is of value for more than one situation. 9. Be sure that your action supports your communication. You must not say one thing and do something else. 10. Seek not only to be understood by, but to understand the other's individual. 11. Have a specific purpose in mind when communicating. Do not ramble. Next, be enthusiastic so that others will catch your enthusiasm. And when possible, provide evidence to support your communication. Next, consider the listener's education, experience, prejudice, and background. And last, use language which can be understood. So, the art of listening and perceiving. So, to become a better listener, the following should be practiced. So, in advance, where possible, get some understanding of what the speaker may present or what the speaker's presentation techniques may be. Second, look for the major points of the presentation rather than the body language techniques of speaking and so on. Third, determine the speaker's purpose, what the speaker is attempting to accomplish with this presentation. Fourth, determine whether the evidence presented is reasonable and accurate and whether the message is valid. 5. Be open-minded and put aside your own personal biases and prejudice. And 6. Try to interpret what the speaker is saying, not what you think the speaker is saying. So, building your communication skills. As a supervisor or manager, you are a little value of possibly no value at all unless you are able to get employees to carry out the necessary assignments to get the job done. This is accomplished by using good communication techniques and where necessary hands-on explanation of the work to be done. So the supervisor or manager should consider the following idea when attempting to improve his or her communication skill. First, plan what you are going to say and how will you say it in a clear and concise way. Explains as clearly as possible using short or common words. Third, direct your message at the individual instead of directing it at a larger group. Make the message a personal message so that the individual feels that you are interested in him or her. Fourth, using additional visual aids such as sketches, slides, photographs, or models. Fifth, listen carefully to what the employee's response is to you. Give the employee an opportunity to respond. Six, double check to make sure that the individuals understand what you mean. And silence does not mean acceptance. 7. Back up your communication with specific actions. If you promise to do something, do it. And 8. Evaluate the final result of the communication and determine whether the tone of your message was offensive and whether your message was misunderstood or whether it stimulated a good response in the employee. So, communication difficulties. It would seem logical that if you have the right facts, the right beliefs, and the right ideas, you would be able to get an individual to accept them and carry out your concerns. However, the fact is that communication difficulties will still exist, and they are as follow. So first, your fact may interfere with what the individuals feel is true. Second, your beliefs may be totally different from the individuals and therefore what you say is offensive to him or her. Third, what you say may not be clearly understood and is therefore misinterpreted. Fourth, telling it once is not enough because even if it is clear and simple, it may be acceptable and received by certain people but not by all. If it is not clear and simple, very few listeners will perceive the information. Fifth, communication in the form of rules and regulation may appear to be directed orders which are resented by certain individuals. 6. Communications can be interrupted by organizational lines, staff, and line function. 7. Certain types of communications are confidential. However, the confidential communication tends to create problems with individuals at entry-level position because they feel that a hidden technique is being used. 8. The communicator may have difficulty in getting messages across. 9. The manner of communicating must fit the type of communication, and it is important to know when to use an informal request versus a formal order or formal written order. 10. When a communicator lacks knowledge or background, employees are quick to notice this, which results in a negative response from them. 11. everybody brings bias and prejudice to a situation, and the bias or prejudice may affect the communication. 12. Communications are changed as they come down from top management to lower levels. Therefore, communications must be checked each step along the way to make sure they remain accurate. 13. The communicator may be talking down to the employees. This is a very poor technique because it becomes insulting. 14. The communicator may, in his or her mannerism, suggest a superior attitude, which will also affect the communication. 15. The communicator speaks too rapidly. Next, public policy and community relation. So, the public is not interested in the communication that flow throughout the organization. They recognize you as the official spokesperson, and therefore, anything and everything you say is considered to be official organizational policy. So, it is important when you deal with the public that you follow the following rules. First, give out only the information which you consider favorable. Second, present facts only. Do not give opinions. Third, avoid bad press relations and bad publicity by giving out adequate and sufficient information. Fourth, never tell a reporting anything of the record. Of the record means nothing, and it may be printed inaccurately. Fifth, where the organization is performing a public service, it is a good idea to inform the press and the public about it. 6. If your firm provides speakers for a variety of civic organizations, make sure that you fully understand the policies and procedures and you must follow when addressing civic groups. And if you do not know the answer to a question properly and promptly, make sure that someone in the organization answers the question properly. 8. Always be pleasant, prompt, and accurate in your dealings with the public. That would be all, and thank you.